My son leaned across the table at brunch and brushed off my greeting while his wife flashed a new Hermes bag and laughed. She doesn't know much about these things. My heart sank, but I held my head high, every wrinkle on my face, carrying the weight of sacrifice. Quietly, I placed a new card in my drawer at home, a card meant not for spending, but for watching. They didn't know that humiliation was only the first page of a longer story. Before I continue the story, please subscribe to the channel and leave a comment letting me know where you're watching from. The morning sun filtered through the tall glass windows of the restaurant, throwing shifting patterns across the polished tables. I arrived early, as I often did, preferring to be the one waiting instead of the one making others wait. The air smelled of roasted coffee and fresh pastries, and the hum of quiet conversations floated across the room. I adjusted my scarf, the one Arthur had given me on our 30th anniversary, and walked toward the table where my son and his wife were seated. "Good morning, Dorian." "Celine," I said warmly, hoping the sound of my voice would carry the tenderness of a mother greeting her family. But before my words could settle, Dorian turned to greet a colleague who had just walked by, his face lit with charm reserved for others. Celine barely glanced up, her lips pressing together in what might have been acknowledgement or impatience. My greeting slipped into the air unanswered, disappearing into the clatter of cutlery and soft music. The sting caught me off guard. I stood for a moment longer than I should have, my hand hovering over the back of the chair before lowering myself quietly. My eyes drifted across the table, and I forced a smile, hoping no one noticed the small wound already forming inside me. The waiter came by to pour water, and we adjusted ourselves around the table. I noticed immediately that my seat had been placed at the far edge, tucked near the aisle, where servers whisked by with trays. Celine and Dorian sat close to the center, surrounded by their friends, their laughter and animated voices making them the natural focus. Arthur, my husband, leaned slightly toward me, whispering, "It's just a table. Don't read too much into it." His words, meant to comfort, deepened the sting. To him, it was only furniture and placement. To me, it was the unspoken language of belonging and importance. I had always believed family meant being at the heart of things, but here I was, set off to the side like an afterthought. I adjusted my napkin across my lap, pressing it firmly as though that small act could steady the rising bitterness within me. I sipped from my water glass, listening to their conversations. Talk of investments, new restaurants, and weekend trips filled the air, each story laced with confidence. I sat quietly smiling when it seemed polite, though the edges of my mouth felt heavy. Then Celine lifted a polished leather bag onto her lap, its glossy surface catching the light. "It's Hermes," she announced, letting the word linger, as though it were a crown she had just placed upon her head. Her friends leaned in, admiring the stitching, the lock, the shine. One of them, a woman in a silk blouse, glanced in my direction. "Does your mother-in-law know about these?" "She must love fine things, too." Celine laughed lightly, shaking her head. "Oh, she doesn't know much about these things." The words cut with perfect precision. Not loud, not sharp, just casual enough to dismiss me in front of everyone. Laughter rippled softly around the table. Dorian leaned back in his chair, his smile wide, as though nothing had been said at all. I lowered my gaze to the tablecloth, tracing the embroidered edge with my fingertip. My cheeks warmed not from pride, but from humiliation. I wanted to vanish into the linen, to fold myself into invisibility. Yet I sat still, unwilling to give anyone the satisfaction of seeing me retreat. Arthur cleared his throat, shifting uncomfortably, but said nothing. Silence filled the space where my defense should have been. I swallowed it whole, tasting the bitterness that came with it. I wrapped both hands around my teacup, letting the warmth steady me. Around me, the brunch continued without pause. Forks lifted, mimosas clinked, laughter rose. My son basked in the attention, his voice carrying easily as he told stories of business meetings and upcoming trips. Celine leaned into him, her face bright with delight at being the center of admiration. From my corner, I scanned the faces, searching for a flicker of acknowledgement, a glance that might remind me I was still seen. None came. Inside memories pressed forward years of raising Dorian, nights of working late to keep the household afloat, the countless sacrifices hidden behind ordinary days. The family legacy Arthur and I had built was alive at this very table, yet somehow I was fading into the wallpaper of my own life. The unease settled deep in my chest, heavy and quiet. I sipped my tea and forced a smile when someone's gaze lingered too long. The plates cleared slowly, the hum of conversation steady as waves. I sat back, folding my napkin, carefully keeping my movements calm, deliberate. This was not the first time I had been overlooked, not the first time a remark had cut sharp enough to leave a mark. But today felt different. Beneath the bitterness, beneath the humiliation, something else stirred an instinct I hadn't felt in years. I told myself to remain quiet, but my silence would not last forever. A vow formed in the stillness of that restaurant. I would watch, I would listen, and when the time was right, I would not be ignored. The glass doors of Reynolds & Co. reflected the mid-morning light as I pushed them open, my heels tapping against the marble floor. The building smelled faintly of coffee and polished wood, the same way it had for decades. I used to walk in here with pride, feeling every plaque and certificate lining the walls as though they were extensions of my own skin. Today, the pride was muted. The memory of Sunday's brunch still clung to me. Selene's dismissive words echoing in the back of my mind. In the lobby, a large printed board caught my eye. It listed the agenda for the weekly management meeting, bold letters declaring who would speak on each item. I scanned it carefully, my eyes searching for the spot where my name had always appeared. It wasn't there. Rows of tasks and projects stretched across the board, Dorian's name highlighted in clean print, Selene's mentioned in relation to public relations. But mine, once a fixture, had been wiped away, as though I had never belonged. The edges of my vision blurred for a moment. I stood very still, trying to steady my breathing, unwilling to let the receptionist or anyone walking by see the flicker of humiliation crossing my face. My name had been removed in silence the way a stain is scrubbed from cloth. I pushed open the meeting room door. Conversation hushed for half a breath, eyes flickering toward me before quickly darting away. The long mahogany table gleamed beneath the overhead lights, water glasses set neatly, not a single one at the chair I once occupied. Dorian looked up, his expression smooth as glass. "Mother," he said warmly, too warmly, "we didn't want to trouble you with today's meeting." His smile broadened, polished enough to pass for courtesy, but sharp enough to cut. Trouble me. As though my years of labor, my sacrifices, the very foundation of this company, were now a burden. Around the table, no one spoke. Some glanced at their notes, others adjusted their pens. The silence was worse than words. It was complicity. I nodded once slowly, holding my chin steady. "I see," I said, though. What I saw was a son who had learned how to erase without raising his voice. I stepped back, closed the door quietly behind me, and walked down the corridor, the sound of muffled voices resuming behind me like waves, reclaiming the shore. The hallway stretched long and empty. My steps echoed against the floor, each one carrying the weight of years, suddenly questioned. I paused near a window looking down at the busy Houston street below. Cars streamed by, horns, faint in the distance, life bustling on as though nothing had changed. But for me, something had shifted. The company I had built was slipping through my fingers. I could feel it like sand draining from a clenched fist. My name had not just been left off a board, it had been crossed out of a legacy. I pressed a hand against the window frame, taking in the steady rhythm of my breath. I would not let them see me falter. Later that day, I stopped by the accounting office. Bryn, a young accountant with eager eyes and a nervous energy, looked up from her desk when I entered. "Mrs. Reynolds," she said quickly, standing as if caught off guard. "I'll need the financial report for last quarter," I told her, my voice even. Bryn hesitated, her hands fidgeting with the papers on her desk. "Oh, Her gaze darted to the floor, then back to me. "I was told," By your son, not to send them to you anymore. He said he approves everything now." The words hung in the air heavier than any silence. My heart clenched, though my face remained still. Confirmation. The exclusion was not an oversight, it was deliberate. I managed a faint smile, the kind that carried no joy. "Thank you, Bryn. That's all." Her eyes widened as though she expected me to protest, to argue, to demand, but I only turned and walked away. Back in my office, I closed the door and let the weight press down. The walls around me held pictures, years of celebrations, milestones, employees who had once called me the heart of the company. Now those walls felt like witnesses to a slow erasure. I sat at my desk, folded my hands, and whispered to the quiet, "Not yet." I would not shout. I would not plead. My silence, once a wound, would now be a weapon. I would observe. I would wait. And when the time came, I would act. I promised myself then I would watch, and when the time came, I would act. The downtown Houston bank felt familiar, its glass doors reflecting the morning light as I stepped inside. I'd been coming here for years, and the tellers greeted me with polite nods, their faces steady with recognition. Yet today I was not here to manage investments or routine accounts. Today was different. I walked with a deliberate calm, my handbag tucked close to me, every step measured. "Good morning, Mrs. Reynolds." The teller said, her voice cheerful. "Good morning," I replied, my tone even. "I'd like to activate a new card, but I'll need to make some adjustments." We moved to a quiet corner. I signed the forms with practiced ease, my pen steady. The card I requested would have limits alerts and silent triggers. Every purchase would whisper back to me through notifications. To anyone else, it looked like a simple replacement, but for me, it was bait, a honeypot, a test of loyalty wrapped in plastic. As the teller handed me the envelope, my fingers closed around it with resolve. I did not smile. This was no ordinary banking errand. This was the first move in a game my son did not know he was playing. Later, in a private office, the banker explained the details. "You'll receive alerts immediately. If there's unusual activity, you'll be notified before the transaction clears." I nodded, listening, but my thoughts were elsewhere. Dorian had grown confident, too confident. He believed my silence was weakness, that my absence from meetings meant surrender. He thought erasing me from the board was the end of my voice, but he had forgotten who taught him strategy, who built the foundation he now stood upon. I let the banker finish, thanked him with calm courtesy, and tucked the card into my wallet. As I walked out, the morning sun caught the glass windows, and for a moment I saw my reflection staring back, older lined but not defeated. I whispered inwardly, "I will play smarter than my own son." The words steadied me. My silence would no longer be submission. It would be my shield, my weapon. At home, the quiet of my study wrapped around me. The shelves lined with books, the framed photographs of years past, all bore witness to the legacy I had built. I sat at my desk and opened the drawer. Slowly, carefully, I placed my wallet inside the new card, nestled where any curious eye might find it. I arranged the desk deliberately, a blue folder stacked neatly on top, papers peeking out as though important. The wallet slightly visible beside it, not hidden, not flaunted, just enough to tempt. It was bait, but also truth. If trust still lived in this house, the wallet would remain untouched. If not, then proof would come to me without a word. I closed the drawer partway, leaving the edge ajar, the suggestion of secrecy more powerful than secrecy itself. My heart beat with a mix of bitterness and suspense. Isolde arrived in the afternoon, her quiet presence filling the doorway. She was young, sharp, and loyal in ways few had proven lately. She placed legal papers on my desk, her eyes scanning the arrangement for a fraction of a second longer than necessary. Her gaze lingered on the blue folder, the wallet visible beside it. She said nothing, but her silence spoke more than words. She gave me a cautious look, one that carried understanding. Then she simply nodded as though to say she knew, she approved, she trusted. I felt a flicker of warmth at that unspoken support, in a world where even my own son cut me out. The smallest glimmer of loyalty meant everything. I drew strength from her silence, from her decision to stand with me without demanding explanation. "Thank you, Isolde," I said softly. She only smiled faintly and left the room, the door clicking shut behind her. Night settled over the house. I sat at the desk once more, the glow of the lamp casting soft shadows across the blue folder and the wallet. My hands rested flat on the wood, steady. If they cross this line, I thought, I will have all the proof I need. I stood, turned off the lamp, and let the study fall into darkness. The bait lay in plain sight, quiet and patient, like me. I closed the door behind me, the silence of the house pressing in heavy with anticipation. That night, I left the wallet in the drawer, knowing temptation would be stronger than loyalty. I lay awake long after Arthur's breathing settled into the rhythm of deep sleep. The silence of the house was fragile, broken only by the faint hum of the air conditioner. Then my phone buzzed against the nightstand, a motion alert. My heart tightened, but my hand was steady as I reached for it. The notification read, "Study camera. Movement detected." I tapped the screen and the live feed bloomed in the dark. The study door cracked open, a sliver of light from the hall spilling across the floor. My thumb hovered, but I didn't move. I whispered to myself, "Watch. Don't interrupt. Record." On the screen, the door widened. Dorian slipped into the study shoulders, tense, his eyes darting left and right before settling on my desk. He hesitated. His fingers hovered above the blue folder, brushing the corner as though debating whether to take it. From the hallway came a whisper, Celine's voice sharp and low. "Hurry." I watched as my son pocketed the card from the wallet, and then with a practiced calm snapped quick photos of the folder's documents using his phone. His movements were careful, but not careful enough. He didn't know the camera caught the reflection of his face in the glossy surface of the desk. He eased the drawer shut, straightened, and slipped out, closing the door as if nothing had happened. My hand trembled only once as I pressed the capture button, saving stills of the entire sequence. Timestamps burned into the corner of the footage, proof cold and indisputable. From bed, I moved quickly. The clip exported to my encrypted drive, and I typed a brief log, camera 3, study. 12:42 a.m., subject Dorian Reynolds, action removal of wallet, photographs of blue folder. I blind copied the files to my private archive, then flagged a meeting with Isolde later that week. I slid the phone beneath the sheets, glancing once at Arthur. He slept soundly, his trust in the house intact. I said nothing, not yet. Silence again would serve me better. Minutes later, the phone lit up again. This time, the caller ID glowed Fraud Department. I answered softly, "Yes, Mrs. Reynolds. This is Daniel from security. We flagged unusual activity on your account. 2 first-class tickets to Los Angeles, attempted purchase of a luxury watch, both within the last hour." I closed my eyes, breathing slow. Leave the card active. I want the alerts in real time. Do not block it yet. There was a pause. "Are you sure I am? Send written confirmations of each attempt to my secure email. I'll need merchant names, amounts, and times." The specialist agreed, his tone respectful. I thanked him, calm, but cold, then ended the call. The glow of the phone faded, leaving me in darkness again. By 4:30 a.m., I sat at my desk in a robe, the printer humming softly. Still frames spilled out, each labeled with time and camera ID. One showed Dorian's hand on the wallet, another his face half lit as he slipped the card into his pocket. I lined the photos beside his graduation portrait, which still hung on the wall. My eyes lingered on the younger face, the proud smile of a boy who once clung to me after soccer games, who once trusted me for every answer. The empty space where the wallet had been seemed to echo louder than the quiet house. "This ends on my terms," I whispered to the empty study. My voice was steady, but my chest ached with a familiar bitterness. By sunrise, I printed the stills and laid them beside Dorian's graduation portrait, just as a knock at my door brought a smaller, sharper hurt. The morning light bled slowly through the curtains, pale and thin, as if reluctant to enter a house that no longer felt like mine. I sat at my desk with the printed stills spread before me, each frame capturing Dorian's theft in cold silence. My hands rested on the edges of the paper, pressing them flat against the wood, anchoring myself in the truth I could no longer deny. A knock interrupted the quiet. Soft, hesitant. "Come in," I said, my voice steady, though my chest was tight. The door creaked, and Vera, the housekeeper who had worked here for more than 20 years, stepped in, carrying fresh linens. She kept her eyes lowered, lips pressed together as if holding back something painful. "Ma'am," she began, her tone tentative. "Mr. Dorian told me not to prepare your room anymore." For a moment, I thought I hadn't heard her correctly. The words seemed to hang in the air, suspended, then crash down with a weight I felt in my bones. My own son telling the woman who had folded my sheets for decades that I no longer deserved a space in my own house. I inhaled slowly, pressing the stills into one neat pile before me. I murmured. Vera's face flushed. "I'm so sorry, ma'am. I didn't want to say it." He insisted. I stood, reaching out to touch her arm. "It's not your fault, Vera. You've always been loyal. Don't carry his cruelty as your burden." She nodded, her eyes shimmering, then placed the linens on a chair and slipped out of the room. The door clicked shut, leaving me in a silence far heavier than the one before. I walked slowly down the hallway, the air thick with betrayal. Each step seemed to echo erased, erased, erased. My son wasn't just taking my card, my authority, my trust. He was trying to erase my very place in this home. By the time I entered the study again, the heartbreak had hardened into something sharper. I pulled a thick legal file from the shelf and laid it flat on the desk, positioning it beside Dorian's framed graduation photo. His young face, beaming in cap and gown, stared back at me. The file's spine pressed against the edge of the frame, present colliding with past in a cruel symmetry. "You once stood on that stage because I believed in you," I whispered. "Now you stand against me." The day stretched ahead, and I filled it with deliberate action. I gathered the fraud alerts forwarded by the bank, stapling them neatly. I wrote notes, dates, amounts, each insult etched into the margins. The video timestamps joined the pile, then the stills. The work became a ritual, each page, a stone stacked in a wall I would not let crumble. The act of documenting was not just about proof. It was about reclaiming my strength, piece by piece. My pen scratched steadily, my resolve sharpening with each line. He would not erase me so easily. As dusk approached, I returned to the desk and stood before the portrait. Dorian's smile felt like a ghost, now a memory of a boy I once tucked in at night, whose fears I soothed with lullabies. I lifted the frame, brushed the dust from its glass with the edge of my sleeve, and looked into those eyes one last time. "If they've taken my room, they will not take my name," I whispered. Then with a slow, deliberate motion, I turned the photo face down. The sound of it resting against the desk was small but final. I stepped back, the legal file looming larger than the image of my son, and felt the vow seal itself inside me. Turning his picture face down, I realized humiliation had moved beyond the home it was about to go public. The Post Oak Hotel glimmered like a crown jewel that night. Its chandeliers spilled golden light across marble floors, and the murmur of Houston's wealthiest floated through the cavernous ballroom. I arrived in a dark navy gown, simple yet elegant, unwilling to compete with sequins and diamonds, but determined to hold my dignity. Arthur walked beside me, quiet as always, his presence more shadow than shield. At the reception table, a smiling attendant searched for my name, then gestured toward a table tucked near the service doors. "Right this way, Mrs. Reynolds." I paused, my lips pressing together, but followed. Each step away from the stage was a reminder I had been moved to the margins, literally. The air near the service doors carried faint kitchen aromas and the clatter of plates. The guests around me were polite strangers, distant acquaintances who smiled thinly before returning to their own conversations. I sat spine straight and told myself to breathe. Celine swept past her gown, shimmering under the chandeliers, every detail screaming wealth. She guided arriving guests to the prime tables near the stage, laughing as though she were mistress of the evening. Dorian followed sharp in his tuxedo, shaking hands and leaning close to whispers of admiration. His eyes found me. He gave a small nod, nothing more, before moving on. A son acknowledging his mother as though she were a distant business contact. The applause around me grew as introductions were made on stage. My heart clenched, not at their success, but at the cruelty of erasing me so thoroughly in public. Marjorie, a voice chimed. I turned to see Cressida, a woman I had known for years in passing. She smiled thin as the rim of her glass. "So you've retired already, must feel nice to rest." The words dripped with something more than curiosity. Around us, others leaned closer, waiting for my response. I lifted my chin. Rest doesn't come from being pushed aside, Cressida, but it does give one time to see more clearly. Her smile faltered just a flicker before she excused herself to another circle of admirers. I swallowed the sting and reached for my glass of water, its chill steadier than the warmth in the room. From my place near the service doors, I had an unfiltered view of the stage. Celine sparkled as she floated among benefactors. Dorian adjusted his cufflinks before taking the microphone. "Reynolds and Corer stands where it is today because of our vision for the future," he declared, his voice booming with confidence. "Not our family's vision. Not even a nod to the decades I had poured into the business, the nights I stayed up reconciling ledgers when he was still learning his alphabet." The audience clapped the sound like a wall shutting me out. I made a mental note of his exact phrasing. Words matter, and these would matter later. When the speeches ended, the music swelled and laughter filled the room, but I slipped away. The hallway outside was dimmer, quieter, the carpet muffling my steps. I leaned against the wall, pressing my hand against my chest, letting the humiliation wash over me and then drain, leaving something sharper behind. If they want me invisible, I whispered to myself, I'll choose when to reappear. I straightened the vow settling deep inside me. Tonight, they had crossed a line, and soon their lies would no longer hide in the shadows of chandeliers. As the gala lights dimmed, I knew the humiliation had crossed a line. It was time to expose more than their lies. That morning, my inbox was cluttered with routine notes from vendors and reminders that barely held my attention. But then, nestled between them was an email chain, forwarded by mistake. The subject line was familiar, the company's expense approvals. My hand froze over the mouse as I saw the names Dorian and Celine. Their words unfolded line by line, and with every sentence I felt the ground shift beneath me. They weren't discussing business efficiency. They were laughing. "Mother doesn't need to see this. She's old-fashioned anyway. We'll redirect the travel funds. She'll never know." My eyes traced those words over and over, my throat tightening, as though the letters themselves were strangling me. It was one thing to be dismissed in silence in a room full of polished smiles. It was another to see the betrayal carved in their own handwriting, permanent and undeniable. I printed the email slowly, feeding each page onto the tray of my printer like delicate glass. The hum of the machine seemed louder than ever, echoing in my study, in my chest. Each page I held was proof. Each phrase highlighted was not just evidence of deceit, it was a confession wrapped in arrogance. I placed them carefully in my growing file, the edges aligning like a soldier's march. I didn't cry, not this time. Yes. Shock was a blade, and I steadied myself to hold it by the handle instead of the edge, but betrayal rarely travels alone. Just as I slid the papers into their folder, the phone rang. It was the jeweler downtown, an old acquaintance trusted for decades. His voice carried both hesitation and care. "Mrs. Marjorie," he said softly, "I thought you should know. Celine brought in your pearl necklace this morning. She wanted it appraised for sale." For a moment, I couldn't breathe. My mother's pearls, the only heirloom she left me, passed into my hands on the day I became a wife. Celine had taken them without a word, without a thought. My knuckles whitened around the receiver. "Hold them for me," I told him firmly. "Do not let them leave your counter." Within the hour, I stood inside the jewelry shop, the familiar scent of polished glass and velvet trays surrounding me. There they were, my pearls laid out under harsh, fluorescent light, as if they were just another commodity. I reached out and touched them cool against my skin and felt the decades of memory flood back my wedding day. My mother's warm smile, the laughter of a family that once knew loyalty. Celine had tried to pawn not just jewelry, but memory itself. I thanked the jeweler quietly, reclaiming the necklace with a dignity she would never understand. Back home, I placed the necklace beside the printed email on my desk. 2 artifacts of betrayal, one written in digital ink, the other in stolen pearls. They pawned my trust long before the pearls I whispered into the silence of the study. The words surprised me, but they were true. My grief hardened into resolve. These weren't accidents. They were patterns, and patterns left trails. I slid the pearls into a velvet pouch and tucked them into my evidence file with the emails. Then I opened my legal log, the pages now heavy with dates, time screenshots, alerts, and betrayals, cataloged like a prosecutor's case. I wrote carefully: financial misconduct, theft, documented intent. The act of writing was no longer just preparation, it was declaration. For the first time, I allowed myself a small, grim smile. With every piece of evidence, I was no longer the erased mother at the brunch table or the humiliated guest at the gala. I was the archivist of their undoing. Their facade was cracking, and I would be the one to push where it was weakest. By the time night settled, the pearls and the printed words gleamed under the desk lamp like twin witnesses. I knew then that the dinner table, the place where our family once broke bread, would soon become the stage for the first public fracture. I set the table as I always had, linen-ironed crystal, catching the last of the Houston sunset plates warmed in the oven so no one would have a reason to complain. Habit steadied my hands. I took a slow breath before calling them in. The house was quiet, too quiet for a night, with family under one roof. They arrived in a small procession, Dorian first phone in his palm, like a passport to a better country. Celine behind him, perfume drifting and starched ribbons. Arthur last already tired from a day that hadn't asked much of him. We took our seats. Knives met china water glasses chimed, and the air pressed down as if someone had placed a lid over the room. I asked how the day had gone. Dorian did not look up. He passed the bread to Arthur and asked about a golf outing. Celine leaned forward to compliment Arthur's tie as though I had become the chair I sat on. They spoke around me, never to me, and the silence they left in my place was so deliberate it felt like a hand over my mouth. I tasted salt, not from the roast chicken. I tried again, something light about a neighborhood garden tour. Arthur cut his eyes toward me and smiled for the others. "Let's not trouble her with business," he said, a sentence delivered softly and with precision as if it were kindness. Her, as if I were a guest kindly spared adult talk, not the woman who had paid for this roof and the doors now closing around me. Dorian chuckled and asked Arthur about the gala donors retelling the story of the standing ovation as if I had watched it from a TV in another city. I placed my fork down carefully. I moved the serving dishes in a slow circle, hoping the old choreography might draw me back in. When Dorian was small, I'd tapped his wrist and shown him where to place the knife, how to pass bread to the left, how to leave the last roll. He had copied me then, looking up for approval. Tonight he copied Arthur, the laugh, the posture, the careful ignoring of the woman who taught them both the steps. Celine angled her bracelet under the light diamonds, scattering tiny stars across the cloth. "We're thinking of redoing the guest suite," she said to Arthur. She didn't have to add without her. The room already knew. Arthur nodded agreement like a door closing without a click. The roast was good. I had brined and basted it, watched the skin go chestnut. Still, I couldn't taste. Flavors slid past as if I'd caught a cold made of pride. I stared at the bowl of green beans I'd snapped that afternoon, each end trimmed neat. My mother taught me that make a table look cared for. Care, I realized, is invisible work. It vanishes the moment the plate reaches the hand that takes it for granted. I sipped water, steadied my breath, and began to count each slight, each redirected question, each time my name hung in the air, and no one let it land. Arthur told a story about a vendor we had courted years ago, changing we to they without touching the pronoun aloud. Dorian nodded. Selene glowed. I learned more in that hush than I ever could have in a fight. When the plates were cleared, I gathered them myself. No one protested. In the kitchen, steam fogged my glasses, and I let it. Behind the veil, I could imagine I was alone, and everything was quiet because peace had finally come. I rinsed the glasses, dried my hands, and returned to the table with coffee. "Anyone care for dessert?" I asked. 3 heads shook in polite unison. Arthur stood first. "We've got an early start tomorrow," he said to Dorian. To Dorian. I waited for him to offer me his arm, his glance, any small bridge back to my place. Instead, he looked past me at the front door as if distance had already opened it. Something old in me gave way, not with a crack, but with a sigh. I didn't ask for a different ending. I made one. "Thank you for coming," I said, and the words were level, not bitter. "Drive safe." Dorian pocketed his phone. Selene adjusted her sleeve, and Arthur reached for his coat. At the threshold, I touched the frame of the doorway, a small ritual to ground myself, then stepped back so they could pass. Upstairs in the room that had been declared unnecessary for me, I sat at my desk and wrote what had happened, the dialogue, the pauses, the way a husband can betray without raising his voice. I added a line I had promised myself to remember, when silence becomes a blade answer with a sharper quiet. I filed the page with the rest pearls, emails, numbers that told a story without adjectives. I didn't cry. The house had done enough of that for me. Instead, I stood at the window and watched their taillights fade to pinpricks, then to nothing. The street settled. The clock remembered to tick again. I smoothed the linen napkin I'd kept for myself and folded it into a clean square. A small order in a night bent on disorder. In the sink, a single spoon clinked loyal in its small honesty what it was unashamed to be heard. I let that sound be my answer. That night, before sleep could reach me, a warning came from someone I didn't expect. My phone buzzed on the nightstand, and Isolde's name glowed in the dark. I let it ring once more, steadying my breath for whatever truth would ask to be heard. The phone lit up at 10:07 p.m., its vibration rattling the nightstand like a warning bell. I saw Isolde's name. Her voice when I answered was low and urgent, as though even the walls might betray her. "They're moving a flagship client," she whispered. "Not through Reynolds & Co., through something else." Before I could ask, a new email slid into my inbox, a forwarded calendar invite. The title burned Client Transition Internal. My name was nowhere on it. I stared at the list of attendees, Dorian, Selene, a few hand-picked managers, but not me. Not the woman whose name had anchored the company for decades. My hands shook, but not from fear. I saved the invite, printed it, logged the timestamp. Evidence. Every slight was now another stitch in the record. I read between the lines. The agenda was vague strategy, alignment off-site discussion. Location listed only as private suite. They were scrubbing me from the company not just in whispers, but in calendar code. I filed the printout into the growing binder on my desk. If they thought silence would bury me, they hadn't realized I was digging too. The night carried me to my laptop, the blue glow painting my study walls. I opened the Texas Secretary of State's registry and searched. It didn't take long. Windermere Asset Management, LLC. Formed weeks earlier, registered agent address tucked neatly in a Westheimer office park. Organizers Dorian Crow and Selene Crow. My breath caught in my throat, but I forced it steady. I screenshotted everything, the filings, the agent addressed the dates. Betrayal had found paperwork, and paperwork was admissible. By dawn, Isolde sent one more package, an audio export from the executive suite. View-only access, encrypted chain of custody, intact. I pressed play with headphones heart-pounding. Dorian's voice first measured confident. We'll keep her name on the masthead just long enough. Clients see Marjorie they trust. Meanwhile, Windermere absorbs the accounts. Celine's laugh followed sharp and satisfied. She's useful, even invisible, like wallpaper. I paused the recording, jaw tight. Useful. Invisible. They weren't just cutting me out, they were weaponizing me, trading on the credibility I had bled years to build. I took notes as though transcribing a deposition timestamp speaker's context. Then I backed up the file, emailed a copy to my private archive, and logged the evidence. By sunrise, I was back in my study, pearls and papers spread before me like a quiet army. I assembled a slim dossier, the calendar, invite, the registry, search, the audio transcript. I blocked 2 appointments in my calendar, a private lunch with Dorian, and immediately after a confidential board session. I exhaled slowly. For weeks, silence had been my shield. Now it would be my sword. By sunrise, my calendar held 2 appointments, one to look my son in the eye, and one to show the board what he'd become. I chose a quiet bistro inside the Loop, the kind where waiters speak softly. I arrived 20 minutes early and asked for a corner table away from the patio doors. Water first. Breathe. The room smelled of lemon. Linen gleamed under midday light. I placed my purse on the chair beside me, back straight, breathing steady. When Dorian walked in, the hostess turned to look as people do when a man wears a new suit. The suit was slate-cut a shade too sharp for his station. A new watch flashed at his wrist, chosen to say promotion without saying pay raise. "Mother," he said, kissing the air by my cheek. Polite, practiced. "You look well." "I keep busy," I said. "Sit." Menus came. He praised the bistro as if he'd found it. He asked about my garden. I asked about work. He reached for words that sound like progress and mean nothing. Alignment pipeline. I let him talk, then tugged. "About the client transitions you're piloting," I said. "Which accounts exactly and on what dates?" He didn't blink. "We're exploring options." Nothing formal. You know how it is, market headwinds, brand lift, names and timelines, Dorian. I kept my voice even the way I question witnesses. "Who attends the off-site meetings?" "Just internal folks," he said. "I don't want to trouble you." There it was again. Erasure presented as care. I felt the familiar sting and folded it away like tissue paper to be used later. He asked whether I'd tried the halibut. I nodded and set the glass down. "I had a folder out at home last night," I said casually. "Blue. Did you happen to see it?" He smiled easily, never found it. His eyes slid left to the middle distance where a person invents a memory. I watched his face a beat longer than comfort allows, then nodded as though the matter were trivial. Inside the lie joined the ledger. My phone vibrated against the linen. A bank alert luxury boutique in Highland Village. Somewhere across town, a clerk folded tissue over boxes, while a sales associate admired a card embossed with my initials. I glanced without moving my hands and turned the phone face down. Dorian continued a story about unlocking prestige verticals rehearsed to a shine. Another alert. 2 purchases, same district. The server placed our plates. Dorian cut into his steak and launched into a vision for repositioning legacy clients. A third alert hit. The total crossed a line I had set days ago. Our server refilled water with a neat circle of the wrist. The room kept moving while the facts settled into place like coins in a tray. First-class tickets, jewelry, then a luggage boutique known for dear monograms. "Are you heading out of town?" I asked lightly. "Meetings all day," he said. "You know how Mondays stack up." I tasted the halibut delicate clean wasted on a noon full of noise. "Curious," I said. "Someone's traveling." I did not look at the phone. I looked at my son. His gaze flicked to his watch and back. He tried a boyish smile I knew by heart. It washed over me and went nowhere. Celine was spending the afternoon. Dorian was building an alibi with my eyes on him. Silence is an old friend. I let it sit between us. He rushed to fill it. "We've been talking to a new class of client," he said, "folks who expect exclusive vehicles and bespoke attention. They want a different face." "A convenient one," I said. Strategic, he answered. The word landed like a stamp. It matched the audio I already held the calendar invite. I had printed the company they formed with that wind-soft name. I folded my napkin and slipped it onto the plate's rim. A banner slid across my screen. The 2 p.m. session had locked in. Confirmation-stacked directors who knew my name carried weight on documents, not speeches. Dorian was not on the invite. He didn't know to be afraid yet, which made his smile broader when the server offered dessert. I took the liberty of paying the bill when I arrived, I said, standing. Thank you for making time today. He rose, surprised. Of course. We can circle back on the transitions. We will, I said, sooner than you think. Outside, the air hinted rain, the sky pale as pearl. I stepped beneath the awning and forwarded the alerts to my legal archive, attaching a note charges during lunch. Subject present, alibi implied. I added the merchant names and totals to the log, then referenced the earlier calls from the bank. My fingers didn't tremble. Documentation has its own quiet strength. Through the window, I saw Dorian adjust his cuff and check his watch. It gleamed like a small, bright lie. For a moment, I remembered his 8th grade science fair gluing foil to a shoebox for a solar oven. He had wanted it to shine. I had wanted him to learn heat from light. I moved toward the elevator that led to the garage. Floors hummed. Conversations blurred to wallpaper. I tucked the phone away and straightened my shoulders. By the time the doors slid shut, I had already placed the next call to confirm the boardroom, the packets, the screens, the seating. I would go in, calm, and leave the same, not to be mistaken for weakness. By the time I stepped into the elevator, the boardroom was already sealing its doors. The clock struck 2 as I pushed the boardroom doors and took the head seat. A gray Houston sky pressed against the glass, turning the windows into mirrors. To my right, General Counsel Ms. Duarte. Across from her, an external auditor from Whitford and Ames. One chair, conspicuously empty, Dorian's. Arthur waited near the credenza, unsure where to stand. I folded my hands and let the room quiet. I nodded to the secretary. Sealed blue folders slid to each place. Tab 1, I said. Calendar invites titled Client Transition Internal. Note the attendees. My name has been scrubbed. Pages rustled. Tab 2, I continued. Texas filings for Windermere Asset Management LLC organizers, Dorian Reynolds and Celine Reynolds. Formation dates align with the first attempts to move our accounts. Murmurs rose, then faded. Miss Duarte's pen hovered over a blank legal pad. The auditor's jaw set. Arthur looked at me, searching for a softer story. I kept my gaze forward and my breathing even. Audio, I said. The screen showed a simple player time-stamped for the executive suite. Dorian's voice filled the room, careless, confident. She's the seal. We let her sit there, so clients assume continuity while funds transition to Windermere. Celine followed, keep her plaque up until we don't need the shadow. The HVAC seemed to stop. I let it play another beat, then paused and read the time codes into the record. Arthur's shoulders lowered. A director who has known me 20 years put his glasses down and covered them with his hand. Time codes are in tab 3, I said. Chain of custody notes below. The ache under my sternum stayed where I kept it private. Tab 4. The slide listed Merchant City's times. A total at the bottom, over $30,000. A monitored reserve card in my name, I said. At lunch today, while Dorian met with me, Cellini charged first-class tickets, jewelry, and luxury goods. Timestamps overlap his all-day meetings. The auditor cleared his throat. The pattern matches variances we flagged earlier, he said. This was not an accident, I answered. It is a method. Ms. Duarte spoke, fingers interlaced. For the record, exposure includes breach of fiduciary duty, conversion potential wire fraud, and interference with client relationships. She glanced to the auditor. He nodded. The evidence is contemporaneous and preserved. The doors opened. Dorian entered with Celine at his shoulder. Apology arranged like a pocket square. He froze at the sight of the packets. Mother, he said, what is this? A meeting you were not invited to, I replied. Please sit. He took the empty chair. Celine stayed standing as if height could keep her above consequence. I slid 2 documents across the table. Separation agreements, I said. Immediate resignations, restitution within 30 days, dissolution of Windermere, and a 5-year non-compete with non-solicitation. You may retain counsel. Acceptance by 5 o'clock yields a civil settlement. Refusal triggers filings, criminal referral, and a suit in chancery. Celine's mouth opened, then closed. Dorian tried a smile I didn't recognize. We were innovating, he said. You always told me to take initiative. Innovation does not require theft, I said. Initiative is not erasure. He looked to Arthur. Dad, Arthur's voice was thin. Son, I don't understand. You understand enough, I said not unkindly. We will speak at home. Celine tried a softer tack. We can fix this privately. No need to embarrass the family. The family was embarrassed at the gala, I said. This is governance. Ms. Duarte set a timer face down. You have 20 minutes to confer with counsel in the anteroom, she said. If you sign now, we'll receive the executed pages. Otherwise, we reconvene at 4. The auditor offered neutral pens as if ink could be impartial. They stepped out. The room exhaled. I splayed my hands on the oak and watched the second hand crawl. A director whispered, I'm sorry, without looking up. I nodded. Grief lived under glass. I would not tap it. When the door reopened, they wore the white shine of people who have seen a whole future collapse in a hallway. Dorian spoke first. We'll sign. This is a misunderstanding, but he didn't finish. Pens moved. Ms. Duarte witnessed. The auditor initialed where his firm required. The stack came back warm from their hands. Arthur whispered, How did we get here? The question hung between us like a light that would not turn off. I placed the signed pages in my folder and stood. By believing my silence meant absence, I said. It never did. I thanked the board for their steadiness. Ms. Duarte gathered exhibits. The auditor closed his case with a quiet click. Crisis slid into procedure. Outside evenings softened the glass. When the doors opened again, the company was safer, and my marriage was suddenly very quiet. That evening, Arthur and I sat across the kitchen table like witnesses after a storm. The coffee between us had gone cold. The silence wasn't sharp like the ones I'd endured at the dinner table. This was softer, heavier, an aftermath silence. Arthur rubbed his temples, his eyes drawn to the floor. I should have seen it, he said quietly. His voice carried the weight of years of blindness. I wanted to believe in him so badly that I ignored what was right in front of me. I folded my hands together, steady but tired, and I wanted to believe silence would protect us, that by not confronting, I was preserving peace. We both gave him room to take more than he was owed. For the first time in weeks, Arthur lifted his gaze and met mine. So what do we do now? I drew in a slow breath. We protect the house we built, the company, and whatever is left of us. No contact with them unless counsel approves. That's the rule. He nodded. The exhaustion in his face softened into something closer to grief. Honest grief. We were finally speaking the same language. The next morning we set down our new rules in writing. A page taped to the refrigerator read, No minimizing, no rewriting history, no shielding truths. Arthur added his own line. If it happened, we say it as it happened. At one point he asked, Do you regret the sting, Marjorie? The cameras, the card, the traps. I looked at him for a long moment. No. It saved the house everyone works in. It saved us from living inside a lie. He said nothing, but his hand lingered on the paper longer than mine. By noon, the board's communications team had finished drafting the internal memo. The words were measured acknowledgement of leadership transitions, assurances of stability, a reaffirmation of client trust. There was no spectacle, no headline to humiliate. Staff and clients deserved clarity, not scandal. I signed off, protecting both the company and the family name. The rumor control plan was set. HR and legal would brief managers, reassure staff, and lock the narrative in place. The outside world would hear silence. Inside, we would speak truth. Within days, the handover became formal. Gwen, our longtime operations director who had weathered late nights and early flights without complaint, accepted the role of Chief Operating Officer. She carried a binder thicker than her arm and the steadiness of someone who earned trust by showing up. We enacted new controls, dual authorization for any significant spending quarterly walkthroughs of audits, conflict of interest attestations signed by every manager. I felt something I hadn't felt in months relief. The company was finally in grown hands, not greedy ones. My role shifted from doer to mentor. Legacy, I realized, is not bloodline, it is stewardship. Weeks later, council confirmed the first restitution payment cleared. The non-compete clock started that day. I signed the receipt not with triumph, but with steady breath. Justice had been served, but justice is never sweet. It is only steady. 3 months passed. The air inside the company began to clear. Attrition dropped. One longtime client emailed me, "We stayed because you stayed calm." Staff surveys showed a rise in trust. Friday bagels returned to the break room. I walked the floor, remembered birthdays, called people by name. Stability had returned not by accident, but by choice. Arthur and I did the same. Therapy appointments every week. Evening walks beneath the live oaks where he would reach for my hand first. We learned not to defend the past, but to listen to the present. Marriage, like legacy, is a choice renewed each day. Not every door could open yet. A brief email arrived from Dorian sent through counsel. Payment confirmed. No apology, no warmth, just transaction. I replied through counsel, received. That was all. The door remained closed. Closed, but not locked. Time would decide if it opened again. On a Saturday morning, my granddaughter Iris visited. She wandered into my study and found a small seashell resting on my desk. "Does it still sound like the ocean?" she asked. I smiled. "Only when we listen." I set the shell beside my monitor, a reminder to keep the tide steady. The world will always rise and fall, but the rhythm of resilience is mine to hold. That afternoon, I locked the office and stepped outside into the warm Houston light. Not triumph, but balance. Not revenge, but resolution. Some legacies are built by what you refuse to excuse. Mine will be one of them. I didn't win by shouting. I stayed by standing, and that was enough. Looking back, I realized silence was never weakness. It was the strength that gave me space to see clearly and act wisely. Life will test us in ways we never expect, sometimes through the very people we love most. But dignity, patience, and truth will always protect what matters most. My story isn't just mine, it's a reminder that we can all choose resilience over rage, clarity over chaos. Now I'd love to hear from you. Have you ever faced a moment where silence became your strength? Share your thoughts in the comments. If this story touched your heart, type 1 below or tell me where you're watching from. And if you want more stories like this, don't forget to subscribe to the channel. Your journey with us is just beginning.